So certainly in the last few months and obviously also in the last few years, there's been a lot of conversations around fees. There's been CRM2, there's now CRM3. The notion that fees on the investment side of the world should be more transparent. I think we all agree that should be the case.
Absolutely.
Can you maybe put some context around the fees and the impact of fees on rate of return and maybe more importantly, the impact of fees on client results?
Yeah, and that is a really good question because it's something that's coming up more and more. And some of the questions that I'll have come up are, so what impact are fees actually going to have on my results? And I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the media. I'm being told a lot of stuff when I go into the bank or when I talk to this other financial advisor. So what do I actually need to believe? Because I think one of the things that goes on in the industry, and the transparency is great, I'm just concerned that there's going to be a lot of confusion or in some unfortunate cases, maybe even misdirection as to what it is that is relevant and what's not relevant. And there are a number of clients that I work with who are physicians, and I think one of the ways I've explained it to them is if I've got a client who's a family doctor and they're working with their patient, they're working in the best interest of their patient, and then if they need to bring in a specialist, those two people are going to work in the best interest to try to do whatever's best for that patient. Our industry can tend to be a little bit adversarial. So if one of my clients goes and sits down with someone at the bank or another advisor, one of the first things they're going to try to do is undermine their confidence in what it is that I've told them and using some of the information that's there. And a lot of the time that comes up that it's going to be fees. So I spent a lot of time really researching that. And I think one of the best illustrations of that is usually when somebody meets with me for the first time, they've got investments at some other financial institution. People will bring in a statement and they'll have me do an analysis on what their holdings are. So there were a number of portfolios that people brought in that were very similar to one of the solutions we use, Maestro Portfolios. And so what I actually did is I've got technology now that will let me look inside of all of these different funds. And I wanted to pick ones that were all considered global equity balanced portfolios. They all had very similar mandates. They were all very similar asset composition. So I was comparing apples to apples. And I sorted them by what the fee was. So we had one up at the top there, 2.67, one down at the bottom, 1.59. And what that essentially means is if the fee was 2.67, if somebody put $100,000 in, over the course of the year, that $100,000 is going to be assessed a cost of $2,670 to pay for the research, analysts, buildings, transactions, technology. For the most part, the advisor is paid out of there as well. So all of that is bundled into one thing. And a lot of the time people will take that information and say, all right, so I'm looking at 5 different funds here. This one's got a fee of 2.67, this one's 2.22. So if I invest $100,000, that means if I pick the one with the low fee, I've got a savings of $450. So sometimes that's the information that's being portrayed by a financial institution. Sometimes it's just a conclusion that an investor is going to come to themselves. But when you look a little deeper on that, when I looked, and this was research I did about a year ago, the 1-year rate of return on those particular funds showed that the top one there had a rate of return of 6.99%. The one at the bottom, interestingly enough, minus 2.61, even though they were all very similar funds. But also when someone's looking at what their net rate of return is on this statement or on a website, that is the return after the fees came out. So again, if I'm looking at that top one, 9.66 was what the gross rate of return was the portfolio manager got. Took that manager some costs in order to run everything, and the net return the investor got was 6.99, or if I look at it in dollars again, they had a net profit of $6,990. So if I were to go back and compare those two investments again, I had one with a fee of 2.67, one with 2.22. Supposedly the one with the lower fee, I got a savings of $450. That looks like it's going to be cash in hand, but when the rates of return were settled, after fees came out, that one actually had a net profit to the investor of $870 less. So that's not always going to be the case, but the more research I did showed that there wasn't always a strong correlation between a high fee or a low fee and a high return and a low return. So I think people are sometimes told if your fee is 0.5% lower, then your return is going to be 0.5% higher. And there is absolutely no basis that is 100% going to be the case. It's one of any number of different factors. So I think what I need to focus on for anybody that we're working with is what are those net results, not what the fee was. And if someone has showing me a fund that has a 10-year rate of return that looks like it's great and has a low fee, I also need to know how much volatility was in that fund, because for the most part, people are not sticking with a fund long enough to get that rate of return. So what did they do in order to make sure they stayed in that fund? So that's just one component of looking inside a particular fund. The other thing I've seen is when different funds are put inside a portfolio. So, if I look at this, how fees can actually be manipulated, and that seems like a strong word in there, but that's what can actually happen. When I think at this point in time, people are very conscious of what is the fee inside my investment. A advisor or a financial institution can just change the composition of different funds to make the fees look differently. So if I were to look at a portfolio here with 3 different funds, so we've got 65% in the top one, 20, 15, that portfolio is going to have a weighted MER or fee of about 2.22%. If someone said, well, it'd really be nice if that fee was actually below 2%, you could just change the asset composition and say, well, we're just going to put 50% in this top one, nothing in the middle one, 50% in the bottom. Well, now the weighted MER is 1.94. So that looks good, but the fundamental composition of that portfolio has been changed. Your results, your returns are going to be completely different. So, people need to understand you've got to focus on what your net return is, what your net result is, not what the fee is leading up to the return or result that's going to be the end result there at the end. So I think what we'll really always look at is, a lower fee doesn't necessarily guarantee a higher return, and the fees are only part of what your return is going to be. And as I mentioned before, the return is actually only part of what your bigger result is going to be.